Okay, so for this fly, we are going to be using a Daiichi hook. It's a 1550 and a size 6. Of course, the size is going to matter depending on where you're fishing. For the San Juan, I like this in a smaller size than a larger. If you're using a streamer hook, it'd be like the size 12. And then we're going to use a little bit of crystal flash, just red crystal flash near the tail. The thread is going to be a uni thread. This is a 6/0 regular wax thread. And then finally rabbit fur for the body. So I prefer to get a whole skin stripped out because I tie so many flies, but in this case, if you want to go buy zonker strips, sometimes cross-cut zonker strips are better because they have more fur on them, so you can get more flies tied per zonker strip. What we're gonna do is put your hook in the vise, and I'm gonna start the thread near the eye, and then go ahead and wrap back. I'm not cutting the tag end. What this allows me to do is wrap back faster. It's one of those little tricks that you learn as a commercial tyer to make your fly tying go by faster. You want to wrap back to the point of the bend that your thread can hang straight, and your thread is going to hang sort of in line with the barb. So wrap back to there. This is one of the keys about doing this fly or tying any kind of woolly bugger fly or any fly streamer that has a long tail that can foul, wrap itself around the hook. What you want to do is do X wraps of thread. We're going to create a thread ball here at the bend of the hook, and we're going to tie the tail in front of this thread ball, and this thread ball will help to prop the tail up a bit, but also to keep the tail from fouling and wrapping around the hook bend. So now that we've got that thread ball tied in there, we're going to take a little bit of fibers from the rabbit hide. So I'm going to take, and not too much. The key of this to this fly is tying everything sparsely. So I'm going to take some of the under fur out, make the tie-in point a little bit smaller. And this is how much fur you should have left. And I'm gonna make the tail about as long as the hook shank. So not very long as far as a streamer tail goes. I don't fish this fly as a streamer that often. I would consider it more of a drifting, a swinging fly, kind of like a slump buster. So I've tied the tail in, and what I'm going to do is just wrap back to that thread ball. And you can see that it's kind of angled the tail up, and it's jammed the tail fibers next to that thread ball. And that'll keep this tail material from fouling around the hook. It doesn't keep it from doing that 100% of the time, but it's better than nothing. Then I'm going to advance the thread up the shank while I tie down those fibers. It's not necessary to build like a tapered body on this fly or for it to be super pretty. This fly is going to be a pretty messy looking fly. In fact, it works best when it looks terrible. And then I'm going to take a piece of crystal flash and tie that in on the shank, on the near side of the shank, and then just double this other half over and tie that in on the far side of the shank. So I have a piece of crystal flash on the near side of the tail, and then a piece of crystal flash on the far side. When I trim this, I'm going to trim it a little bit longer than the tail. I want the crystal flash to be sticking out further than the tail. The body of this fly is going to be tied using a dubbing loop. And in this case, your dubbing loop doesn't have to be longer than, say, 3 inches. You don't want to end up having a lot of material that's left on the back end after you tie this fly. Just a short dubbing loop is fine for this size 6. It's a 3x long shank. So I'm gonna tie a whip finish in at the head just to keep all of my thread wraps in straight. I usually use the rotating part of the vise, but I know not a lot of people have that feature, so I'm gonna just tie it in the round the way you normally would. The key to this fly and a lot of my dubbing loop flies is to have a dubbing loop tool that has some sort of spring action. And what it does is it'll keep the dubbing loop open when I need it to be open, place the materials inside the dubbing loop, And then when I pull back and give it pressure, it draws the thread together and then captures that material inside the dubbing loop. So I've got my dubbing loop tool in, and I'm going to take a small strip of the rabbit fur, and I mean this is a cross cut, a natural sort of chinchilla color of rabbit, and I only need about that's going to be too much, maybe about 2.5 inches of material there. So I'm going to take the rabbit and sort of stroke these fibers to the side. And then I'm going to open up my dubbing loop, place the rabbit in the dubbing loop. And then I'm going to come back here and trim the rabbit off of the hide. You can also tie this with an actual hide where you just pick the fibers off. It's less expensive to tie that way, but I think you'll find it harder to get each individual piece of rabbit fur inside the dubbing loop as opposed to this where it's all lined up for you already. Now once the fur is in the dubbing loop, you want to spread it out. You don't want these fibers to be gathered anywhere where all of the fibers are gathered together. You want to be able to look through the rabbit so that it has sort of a translucent look to the dubbing loop. You want to spread these fibers out to where they are fairly thin throughout the body of the fly. And what I'm also doing is I'm pulling the fibers so that the shorter fibers are closer to the hook shank, and then as I get closer to the eye, what would be the eye of the fly, the fibers are longer. I wanted to create this sort of tapered look to the streamer pattern, to this bunny leech, where the longer fibers are near the eye of the hook, the front of the fly, and the shorter fibers are near the back. So you can do that just by pulling the fibers into the dubbing loop, or do the opposite, push the fibers so that the longer fibers are here near the eye. Pull those out. And I'm just going to spin this dubbing loop up. This is where you get a ton of rabbit all over the place in your eyes and your ears and your nose and your mouth, and it's one of the reasons why I hate tying this fly, is because I can never not get bunny rabbit hair all over the place. So I'll tie a bunch of them at one time, and then I don't tie these commercially either. So the first couple of wraps are going to be kind of gathering the material there near the tail. And once you have one of the wraps that has a lot of material, I'm going to take my fingers and stroke this material back before I take another wrap. And what I'm doing here is I'm creating sort of a V with my fingers so that I can take a wrap of the material, take that material and stroke it back before I take another wrap. And what that does is it's creating sort of a taper to where all of the fibers flow back on this fly. I'm also not like making sure that these are close wraps together. It's okay if the wraps are somewhat far apart from each other. I don't want this fly to be bulky. I want it to be able to sink into the water, absorb a lot of water when you're fishing it, and then be able to sink fast. A lot of streamers or flies that are tied bulky with rabbit or squirrel, they don't sink for the first couple of minutes of your drift. And if you're wade fishing, that means you're not covering the water effectively because your fly is not on the bottom where it should be. I'm going to leave myself about 3 thread wraps of hook shank near the eye. You want to do this with almost all your flies. You don't want to crowd the eye. So I mean 3 successive thread wraps of room behind the eye to tie off your dubbing loop. And then again, I'm going to use that triangle to pull those fibers back. You don't want to crowd the eye or have a bunch of fibers be pushed down when you're trying to whip finish this, or when you're using head cement. You want to create a nice tapered look of your fly. Most streamers should be this way. They should be real nicely, have a nicely tapered head. I use red thread because I think that it sort of gets the fish's attention. So I use red thread or orange thread for every color of bunny leech, regardless of what color it is. When I'm whip finishing, I can sort of grab those fibers back and then whip finish, creating that nice conical head. And then I'll trim the remaining. What I'll also do is I like to take this fly out of the vise and then just kind of pull those stray fibers that didn't get caught in the dubbing loop, pull those away. I don't need a lot of these fibers in my fly box, and they're just gonna end up coming off in the water anyway. So I'll pull those fibers away, kind of stroke those fibers back towards the back, and you have the completed bunny leech here. Fairly sparse. Then you got the under fur near the hook shank that's gonna hold in a lot of the air bubbles. It's gonna kind of hold the shape of the bunny leech, and then you have the guard hairs that are longer that are sticking out from the under fur. And what they're gonna do in the water, the reason why this fly pattern is so popular is it's gonna sort of pulsate and undulate that way as you mend hard, or you can swing it, or you can even swing this in the water table and get the fish's attention. The fly, the way this was told to me, the story about this fly is it was invented by a coach who lived in Aztec or Farmington there next to the San Juan River. And this would have been like in 99 or so that I was told this story. So it's probably pretty close to the person who originated this fly. I don't know their name, unfortunately, but it's always good to give credit where credit's due. And this fly has become a staple in my fly box for most tailwaters. It is, the San Juan River has this thing called a buy fly, where it's a tournament for charity, and you can pick just two flies, and you got to fish them all day long. And after you break off the fly, then you're done for the tournament. You can keep fishing, but none of the fish that you catch count towards the tournament. So you know, everybody's thinking about what kind of fly to use for the two fly. You only have two flies to choose from. This would be one of my flies. That's how important of a fly this is to the San Juan. And I'll tell you a little secret. Most of the time they're not taking this for a leech. So if you were going to tie a leech pattern, it would look more like a mayor's leech. It would look like this. It would be streamlined, and the natural leeches that are on the San Juan are tiny. And you're talking about a leech that is probably this big. Most of the leeches on the San Juan are immature. They're tiny. They're going to be around organic matter that is decaying on the bottom of the river. So all of these slow spots where the real leeches can live on the bottom near the sticks, and they're kind of eating the organic matter. So what this is actually imitating is a piece of moss. I don't know how many times you've caught fish on the San Juan and you go to release them or take the hook out, and there's moss coming out of their anuses. You can tell that they just eat a ton of moss on the river. Moss is not gonna swim away. Not many people are using moss flies, so the fish get this idea that moss is a safe food item. But the big thing is you have a midge, for instance, a fly like this. You have a fish that can make a choice. It can eat something like this, and this is a big fly as far as the real flies that go on the San Juan. They can eat something like this and have to eat 1,000 of these little bugs to compensate for all of the bugs that would be caught up inside the moss, just like that. So you have these midges, these annelids, these leeches, all of them are stuck in the moss. And what the fish does is they'll take the moss, eat the moss. The moss passes through their system, but they've got all of the calorie and all of the energies from all of the bugs that are stuck in it. So that's the big guide secret about the bunny leech. You can tie this as a leech on a strip, you know, kind of like the mayor's leech, where you tie a strip on the top of the shank. This creates more of a leech looking or worm looking fly. This can be good too. There's nothing wrong with this way of tying the bunny leeches. This imitates more of a natural food item though. This is imitating a worm or a leech. This is actually going to imitate moss. So if I had my choice, by far I pick this type of leech to tie. You can also tie this leech by wrapping the hide of the rabbit or squirrel around the hook shank. So a lot of people will tie this way, where they'll wrap around. But you can see the difference that it does. It does a couple of different things. This splays out the fibers too far. I don't want my bunny leech to be that big. It would be like a salmon fly or a carcass fly, something that requires a lot of these guard hairs to be full length. This is too big for a bunny leech that I use on the San Juan. Another thing it does is this material, this hide, if you add this to your fly, it's going to add a ton of weight. This when it gets soaked with water is going to be really hard to cast. It's going to be hard to mend, hard to set the hook. So I don't tie any of my bunny leeches this way by wrapping the fibers around the shank this way. I prefer, even though it's a pain, to put the fibers in a dubbing loop and then have my bunny leeches come out this way. So there you have it. It's the bunny leech, a super killer pattern for the San Juan, but also any of that water that is pond water that you fished on your lakes or rivers where the fish have a ton of time to look at your stuff, and where they're real picky. They're taking food items that you're not sure what kind of food items they're taking. They eat a lot of this kind of moss or organic matter that's found in the rivers and lakes where you're at. So tie it up, try it out, and let me know how it works for you.